The Vanguard Group is an American investment management company based in Malvern, Pennsylvania, that manages approximately $3.0 trillion in assets. It is the third largest provider of exchange-traded funds in the U.S., with approximately $337.2 billion in ETF assets under management, as of January 21, 2014. It offers mutual funds and other financial products and services to retail and institutional investors in the United States and abroad. Founder and former chairman John C. Bogle is credited with the creation of the first index fund available to individual investors, the popularization of index funds generally, and driving costs down across the mutual fund industry. Vanguard is owned by the funds themselves and, as a result, is owned by the investors in the funds. The index fund philosophy. For his undergraduate thesis at Princeton, John C. Bogle conducted a study in which he found that around three-quarters of mutual funds did not earn any more money than if they invested in the largest 500 companies simultaneously, using the S&P 500 stock market index as a benchmark. In other words, 3 out of 4 of the managers could not pick better specific winners than someone passively holding a basket of the 500 largest public U.S. companies. The managers could pick specific stocks which would do as well as picking the 500 largest stocks, but the cost to pay their expenses, as well as the high taxes incurred through active trading, resulted in underperforming the index. History. At the time, the proverbial riposte to the observation that most funds underperformed the S&P 500 was of course, you can't invest in an index. John Bogle tried to create a way in which an individual investor could effectively invest in an index. Index funds had already existed for a few years, but were only available to institutions such as pension funds. Having founded Vanguard as a broker-sold mutual fund company, he quickly turned the company into a no-load fund firm and in 1976 introduced his first index fund. This first index fund for individual investors, called the Vanguard 500, has since outperformed many other competing large mutual funds. Over $100 billion is invested in this mutual fund, and Vanguard has since created other index funds that focus on stocks in particular industries, countries, or companies of varying size. Bogle retired from Vanguard as chairman in 1999 and was succeeded by John J. Brennan. On August 31, 2008, F. William McNabb III succeeded Brennan as Vanguard CEO, having served as the organization's president since March of that year. Since its founding in 1975, Vanguard has grown to become one of the world Euro unregistered trademark's largest no-load mutual fund companies. While mostly known for its low-cost index funds, Vanguard also offers a variety of low-cost, actively managed mutual funds and a line of exchange-traded funds. Vanguard also provides brokerage services, variable and fixed annuities, educational account services, financial planning, asset management, and trust services. Vanguard contracts the management of its actively managed funds to various investment firms and sets a portion of the management expenses paid by shareholders based on the fund's performance. Wellington Management Company manages 2 of Vanguard's biggest funds, the Wellington Fund and Wellesley Income Fund. The Wellington Fund is one of Vanguard's oldest funds, formed on July 1, 1929. Legendary value investor John Neff managed the Windsor Fund from 1964 to 1995, which returned 13.7% annually versus 10.6% for the S&P 500. Vanguard's corporate headquarters is located near Philadelphia in Malvern, Pennsylvania. It has satellite offices in Charlotte, North Carolina and Scottsdale, Arizona. The company also has offices in Australia, Asia, and Europe. Vanguard ETFs. Vanguard is an ETF provider. Vanguard Total Stock Market ETF, Vanguard FTSE Emerging Markets ETF, Vanguard High Dividend Yield ETF, Vanguard Total Bond Market ETF, Vanguard REIT ETF, Vanguard Midcap ETF, Vanguard Dividend Appreciation ETF, Vanguard Total International Stock ETF, Vanguard Information Technology ETF, Vanguard FTSE All World ex-US ETF, Vanguard Healthcare ETF, Vanguard Materials ETF, Vanguard MSCI EF ETF, Vanguard Energy ETF, Vanguard Growth ETF, Vanguard Total World Stock IDXFD, Vanguard Small Cap Value ETF, Vanguard Extended Market ETF, Vanguard Short-Term Bond ETF, Vanguard FTSE Europe ETF, Vanguard Large Cap ETF, Vanguard Utilities ETF, Vanguard FTSE All WDX US. Small Cap ETF, Vanguard Short-Term Corporate Bond ETF, Vanguard Long-Term Bond ETF, Vanguard Financials ETF, Vanguard Extended Duration ETF, Vanguard Small Cap Growth ETF, Vanguard Value ETF, Vanguard Intermediate TMCPTEBD ETF, Vanguard Consumer Staples ETF, Vanguard Intermediate Term Bond ETF, Vanguard MSCI Pacific ETF, Vanguard Long-Term Corporate Bond ETF, Vanguard Mid-Cap Growth ETF, Vanguard SHT Term GOVT Bond ETF, Vanguard Telecommunication Services ETF, Vanguard Mega Cap 300 Growth Index ETF, Vanguard Industrials ETF, Vanguard Consumer Discretionary ETF. See also, comparison of online brokerages, money market, references. External links, official website, Yahoo. The Vanguard Group, Incorporated. Company profile, businessweek.com.